Hey there! Thanks for tuning in and welcome to another Ellipsis Drive Podcast. Here we dive into the stories of people, companies, and technologies that transform and empower spatial data-driven industries. My name is Rosalie van der Maas, and today we'll continue to explore the buy versus build dilemma that every organization faces when designing geospatial infrastructure and solutions. If you want to catch up on Will Cadle's take on this topic, be sure to catch our previous episode. Today, though, we'll be diving in with Dan Pilone, who is co-founder and CEO of Element 84. Dan, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be here.
It's an honor. To kick things off, let's start with your origin story. So, who is Dan Pilone, and what did you look to achieve by founding Element 84 back in the day?
Sure. So, my name is Dan Pilone. My background's in computer science and math. And I had the opportunity, really what kicked a lot of this off is I had the opportunity I was early on in a startup, wasn't a co-founder, but was real early on. And we grew it up. And ultimately it got acquired and spun off and acquired and spun off and kind of went through that normal process. And I really missed what we had. And I know this isn't going to sound like this isn't going the geospatial direction. This is going to go in the corporate culture direction. But I just really missed what we had culture-wise as a company. And so my wife and I'll tell you that we agreed to do this. She'll tell you that I talked her into it. But we decided to start Element 84. And we wanted to create a place that we wanted to work. And we wanted to work on things that mattered. We wanted to work with people who were invested and cared and excited and really kind of pushing things forward. And we would talk about hiring great people and getting out of their way. So that was kind of how things kicked off. My background at that point had taken me into geospatial from a software perspective and a systems perspective. We were building systems for NASA at the time. And so that kind of wove in things like scalability, production quality, all of the kind of the large scale kind of dimensions of geospatial. And then just by nature of geospatial data being huge and complex and all of those things, it was awesome. And the potential for applicability and how difficult it was to get and use at the time, all of this just like lined up at the right time and we set things in motion. And so that was a little over 15 years ago now.
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey so far. Has anything changed in terms of your mission or what you're looking to achieve since then?
I don't know that I would say anything has changed from the mission perspective, as much as we've understood it better, we've internalized it better, we can articulate it a little bit better, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
When we started out to make Element 84, we were going to be a small company. We weren't going to be bigger than 5 people. That was really like what we started with. And I think I had misattributed the size of the company to the culture. And what we learned as the company grew was that the people that made us who we were, the culture that we had, the kind of people we were working with, they were going to career out if we didn't let the company grow. And that's kind of the right way to put it. We needed to give, like, by nature, these are people who wanted challenges and wanted to do hard things and do bigger and better things. And so my wife and I had to kind of shift our thinking to, all right, so then how do we let the company grow sustainably? How do we do this in a way that we don't lose who we are, but give people opportunities, projects to work on, technologies to use, et cetera. We knew the companies we'd work with, we knew the people we worked with, we knew the technology we worked with, all of that was going to change and evolve. And we want to be part of doing that and making data more accessible and more consumable and applicable to real world problems. But we couldn't lose how we did it. And so that was, or why we did it. And so we've gotten better about articulating those things. And that's why I know this is a geospatial conversation, and ultimately that's where we're going. But it's kind of like everything is framed from that,
Mhm.
truthfully, how we think about it. And so it's kind of the right lead into talking about how do we apply that to geospatial.
Makes sense. No, I appreciate that bit of background. Um, so Element 84 is a professional services company with that focus on
Mhm.
geospatial engineering, indeed.
Yep.
And I've learned that your firm likes to go through what you call a discovery phase with new
Yeah.
customers.
Yeah.
Can you share a bit about how taking steps towards discovery helps you shape your work and helps you guide customers in the best direction to address their challenges?
Yeah. This is another thing that's going to end up as kind of a theme, I think. But so And we're, like you said, we're a professional services firm. We're not a product company. And our job is to really just work alongside our customers. It sounds so cheesy, but like partner with our customers. But really, that's how we think about it. We have long-term relationships with our customers. And so it's about really understanding what is it that they're trying to do. And I think this is going to sound like old man yells at cloud, but I think it's real easy in the geospatial space to get wrapped around data formats or APIs or pick your thing. There's a ton of cool technical challenges and real industry domain challenges in here that you could talk about. But it sometimes that can come at the cost of losing sight of like what's the customer actually trying to do? What is somebody trying to do with this data? Why does it matter? And having the biggest geospatial data lake or lake house or whatever you want to call it in the world is meaningless if somebody's not actually applying this data to something. And so starting with the discovery phase really forces us to come at it from that end. We have lots of different technical solutions we can bring to bear, and we can talk about those with film drop and natural language geocoding and Earth search and queryable Earth, and we got all these different things we can talk about that we can bring in as tooling to bootstrap stuff. But at the end of the day, if we don't really understand what the customer is trying to do, what their problem is, put ourselves in their from their eyes, what are they trying to accomplish, then everything else is kind of chasing technical ends of things. And so we start with a discovery phase. You can only get so much from a business development call or an RFP or something like that. When we really sit down and can go through a workshop with a customer, where we can really storyboard what could it look like? What are they trying to do? Look over their shoulder while they're doing whatever they're doing the way they're currently doing it. Then we get a much better appreciation of like, okay, this is where we're trying to get to. And then everything else follows from that. We had our a chief marketing officer we had at Element 84 for a long time introduced the idea of winning the best supporting actor award. And that's our job. We talk about that a lot in the company. It's not our story. It's not our movie. It's the customer's story. It's the customer's movie. And our job is to help them tell it. And our job is to win the best supporting actor award so that they can win the best actor. And that's kind of how we think about it. Discovery sets us up for all of that. I'm sounding so philosophical. Like I feel like I'm in this like philosophical bent. We're not talking technical yet, but
That's
that's how
okay.
it frames it.
That's not a requirement. But I think it's interesting. Like the discovery phase it's not just there to educate your customer about what they actually need, but it also forces your own people to indeed not think in technical solutions, but very much, understand where a client is coming from. So it educates everyone around the table, not just the customer, but you as well.
Absolutely, without question, right? So you mentioned at the beginning where you were continuing the build versus buy discussion, and like you can't really answer that without really understanding what the customer's trying to do. Like there's no, I mean, you guys have a great blog post about this up on your site. Like there's no right answer here. There's probably lots of wrong answers, but there's not a single right answer. It depends on the customer, it depends on their use cases, it depends on their needs, it depends on the organization that they're part of and where they want to invest money and not invest money. And you can't get all of that on just like a quick phone call. And there's no, if we were to come in and just say, here's what you should do, that's it's ill-informed.
Yeah, I can see that. Definitely. So once that discovery phase is complete, how do your findings inform the buy versus build discussion? Like what makes you lean from one towards the other, or makes you consider a combination of both? What do you observe?
Yeah. So okay, so we come out of, so we do our discovery phase, right? The discovery phase is going to be a lot of data gathering for us. And it's going to be, then we start kind of putting that together into like, okay, here's what a solution could look like. And there's not always, it's not even necessarily just one potential approach. There might be different approaches and there's going to be different trades and different costs associated with it. But um, coming out of that, one of the biggest themes almost always is a straight build from scratch is almost never the right solution. I don't want to say it's never the right solution, but it's rarely the right solution. There are so we have this conversation, and I'll be very blunt about it with potential customers on calls. Like even if you don't go with us, even if you don't decide to move forward with Element 84, please don't build it from scratch. Like stand on top of all of the pieces that are already out there. Interoperability is key. Scalability is key. There are data lakes all over, literally all over the planet that you most likely are going to want to use. And being able to interoperate with those is critical. So depending on back to your question though, depending on the customer, if they have an internal dev team, if they're looking for a long-term partner, then that opens up some avenues. How unique is their problem space? How unique what they're trying to do with the data? Then that opens up that problem space. And it's really important to discuss like what really is the value add of that organization. So like if we're talking about a data provider, a satellite operator, their data catalog is that's their bread and butter. Like that's what matters. Their ability to rapidly task and instrument, their ability to create data products that matter to their customers, and their ability to surface them in a way that's consumable, or tag area of interest for frequent tasking or whatever, monitoring, site monitoring, whatever. That's a very different use case than, say, a water department or a rail line, who the back catalog, maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. If they can get away with not having to manage their own data catalogs, that's a huge win. If they can use open data, great. If they can just do a low cost background tasking of a data provider to get the things they need. And then when you start talking about heterogeneous data, when they need to merge, and tell me if I'm at the right or wrong level here, but and once they start needing to combine different data products, and when we talk about geospatial, we tend to think about raster products and footprints on map and things like that. But there are so many, like spatial is a component of so many things, that being able to pull those data sets together and ultimately surface them in a graph, a dashboard, maybe an Excel spreadsheet, something like that, like that's really where they want to get to. So where in that supply chain do they really get value? And then from there, we can start putting together recommendations of saying, here's how you can get to open data. No, you're going to need to task data. How much does latency matter, et cetera? All of those pieces become parts of how do we come at a solution, and how does the customer support that financially or otherwise.
I can imagine that aside from putting together the technical pieces, like indeed you need to understand like what is your challenge, and indeed how unique is your challenge, what types of data are you actually managing, is there an off-the-shelf solution for this, or at least a partial solution for this. There's also the concern of how are all of the existing solutions commercialized if it's not open source.
Yep.
So do you also consult your clients through what does this mean financially in the long term? Like do you project like different scenarios? Because I can imagine that is a complicated conversation to have, especially when you're maybe a developer first and foremost. Take me through that a bit.
Yeah. So we actually, oh gosh, I don't remember when we did it. I'm going to say 2 years ago now, but uh, forgive me if I'm off, but somewhere in there, we actually started introducing what we call our CXO, like lowercase x, consulting. And it's not uncommon. We might be coming in as like a chief geospatial officer or a chief technology officer. We basically want to make sure we don't step on somebody's toes who are actually in the organization, but in a way to provide some of that consulting. Because it's exactly what you just talked about, right? That total, to get all when you hear boss, right? Like the total cost of ownership of the solution becomes a real consideration. And what we found was, we could talk technical. And okay, to give you a sense here, our biggest competitor by far is an organization that has just hired somebody out of another organization who is very excited about being able to come in and build this thing the way they want it internally, and needing to have that discussion of look, building it from scratch, starting it and building it internally, there's your needs are going to feel unique, but there's going to be a lot of them that aren't. There's a lot of overlap with what exists in the industry, whether it's commercial solution, open source solution, whatever you want to look at, or just even a cloud provider providing a service that you could leverage as like a managed solution. But that overall, do you want to manage a development team? Do you want to outsource a development team? Do you want to not care about a development team? How fast do you need to pivot? Are you an early startup who is still trying to figure out data products? You're producing synthetic versions. We had one customer we worked with. We started working with them before they launched anything because we were helping them create synthetic data products to put in front of their customers to understand how they wanted to use the data. And their customers were then, or their potential customers were then coming back with like, well, this is helpful, this is not. If you could do it this way, this would be great. And all of that informed a whole set of like processing pipelines that needed to get built, that once the instruments were actually on orbit and we can actually, process that data, producing a real product that their customer actually wanted to buy. So all of that is in the discussion. I don't know if I actually answered your question. I'm sorry, but all of that is in the discussion of we've got to talk about that whole life cycle, not
Yeah.
just come in and say, oh, you want a stack catalog. Like we can't just
Hmm.
stop there. It's a
Yeah.
much bigger space for the customers.
And yes, you did answer the question because it was basically like, how do you go about that challenge? And it sounds like you've indeed sort of defined an offering actually exactly around that challenge. And I like the total cost of ownership frame. Like if that's a question, or if that's a question you can answer for organizations, I'm sure that's highly valuable and appreciated. Um, from the perspective of an organization who's just trying to figure this thing out. Um, on the topic of, things that are booming within the space, have you seen the boom within AI shape your recent work and your experiences and the asks that you get from clients, in how, projects are shaping up?
Yeah, it's everywhere. Okay, I need to say like where I am personally on this. We talked about it as a company, I don't know, a year or two ago, and I said like, look, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm leaning into this, and if everybody makes fun of me, in a couple of years when they're all like, oh, remember when Dan was all panicky about AI? That's okay. I'm cool with that because I feel like leaning in and being wrong that way is way safer than ignoring it and being wrong. Like it's existential if we don't engage it and leverage it. So with that said, AI is touching a whole bunch of different places here, and it's still like we're still rapidly trying to figure out how it's going to work. I suspect my guess is really we're overestimating it in a lot of places, and we're probably underestimating it and missing entire opportunities of where it could exist. Um, but if you kind of like break it down from where we're seeing it, I would put them in a couple categories. One is just our basic development approach. There's a lot of hype around like, oh, can't you just have AI write your code? Like, no. And there's all kinds of like legal implications and conversations to have there, IP and ownership and everything else. But it's also it's hit or miss. Like it's not there. We build production systems. We make sure they can scale. We make sure they're secure. We make sure they're reliable, like, and they're cost efficient, cost effective, and everything else, and manageable and maintainable. And so it's not just a throw it at a model and blam, there's your system. But it is a key piece to bring along with development. We start talking about things like spec-driven development and things like that, where we're like, really, this gets back to the discovery question you asked in the beginning. If we can use the discovery phase to articulate what the customer needs, then we're in a much better spot to be able to leverage a model to help us be able to actually build a solution quickly, as cheap as possible, and wire all the right pieces together. So from a development perspective, it's there. But let's move to another one. I think that it's changing the way that we interact with data. So at the simplest case, we have it's available. You can, I think we'll talk about it at Phosphor-G. But we have a natural language geocoder. So being able to express natural language, like spatial areas, AOIs in natural language, the Dead Sea, just being able to say that and that turn into a complex polygon that represents that. Or, the corridor between Nashville, Tennessee and Louisville, Kentucky, or something like that. Being able to express these more 5 kilometers off the coast of Nantucket or whatever, being able to express these complex statements, or everything but the airport, so the suburbs of Boston, except for around the airport, and being able to express those and translating those from a natural language into an expression. That is huge. Again, going back to what the customer's trying to do, depending on what their use case is, they can't just like grab a shapefile or a GeoJSON of that. They're like pointing and clicking and all that stuff. And that's something that we can use AI to do really well. Get more sophisticated though, you can start interacting with a model, a conversational experience with a model, where it's leveraging agents to start interacting with underlying data. So now we're in kind of an agentic space, and we're able to take advantage of the deterministic side of agents, but with a natural language interface, make that all more accessible to people. So when they say, I want to know if There's I'm trying to think of a use case I can talk about here. Increased port traffic over this area. That's what I'm looking for. There's a whole complex set of stuff. You could be talking about RF data. You could be talking about SAR imagery. You could be talking about optical imagery. Like there's a whole bunch of things. You could be pulling in tabular data of ship data. You could be looking at AIS information of ship traffic in and out. There's all kinds of stuff that can get pulled in there, and the model can just execute all of that behind the scenes to be able to answer a higher level question like that. So then we get into that's like an interaction pattern. Then you can go all the way to the other end, where you can start talking about how do we think about actually representing and storing the data. And now we're talking about foundation models where we're doing actual like embeddings of geospatial data. And we have our queryable Earth, where the basic approach is we embed optical imagery into the same encoding space, the same vector space as natural language. And so now you can say things like, show me a tree standing alone in a forest. That's going to encode in the same space, and I can now search massive amounts of geospatial data, surface geospatial data. Show me areas under new construction. Show me areas where the tree canopy has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. And we can search all of that quickly, all through the same kinds of techniques that are underlying machine learning.
So that sounds pretty awesome, and also convenient. But I will ask, who here is pushing for the use of AI? Do you see a client being like, hey, so AI is a pretty cool thing. Can I use it this way? Or through that discovery phase, do you find that people naturally have use cases where you're like, well, this is actually a great use of AI, and you're the one that ends up pushing it? What's sort of the give and take there?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's both. So to give you an idea, okay, so the example of where we kind of brought it in and somebody said that's awesome, is that natural language geocoding. I was in a meeting, and we were actually taking a break, and while people were getting coffee and stuff, somebody had asked that they had heard we mentioned it. I had mentioned it earlier in that conversation, and they're like, can you show us? And I like pulled it up, and it was just like, oh my gosh, like light bulbs went off. Like that ability to just naturally express these things and not have to click, because they felt the pain of sitting there in QGIS or ARC or whatever, and like clicking dots to try to define a complex area of interest, and being able to do that. So that was a case where we brought it in. It was just there. We have a customer who's gone the other way and has really been forward leaning and saying like, look, the footprint on the map view, okay, cool, but not really what I want. I really just want an answer to this question. Like, I really just want to know what's happened in this area over, here's my specific question. And is really driven from could we they kind of came at it from like a chat GPT type experience. So like, could we just talk to the data that way, or interact with the data that way? And they came at it from that perspective, and really challenged us with okay, like how far can we take this, and how do you deal with the probabilistic nature of LLMs, and hallucinations, and making sure that like the data's been validated and citing sort all of that, and that really drove us to look at like, okay, let's go back to this agentic thing piece where we kind of combine these. We can say like, okay, we know this is how this is being processed and calculated, and then the LLM is kind of just aggregating it up and providing an interface that lets us talk through what's happening. That one was really driven a lot from the customer side, saying, I want this kind of experience. This helps my users, my operators. Don't make me fire up a GIS tool and start pulling down cogs or hitting them in the cloud or whatever. I just want to know this. I just want to count these things in this scene. Can you make that doable?
And could you?
Yes. Okay. In that case, yes. There's still real high hopes and lots of optimism around what's possible. But this is where I say I feel like we're probably over optimistic in some cases. I think some of it is not going to look as glamorous under the hood as some people imagine. Like, I don't think it's just going to be like, oh, take the latest, LLM 5.5 and it's just going to be able to answer all the questions. Like it's not going to be that way. All of the underlying problems, the where do I get the data? Do I move the compute to the data? What happens to my data is geographically spread all over the world. I've got some stuff in US West, in AWS, US West region, and I've got some stuff in Frankfurt, and I've got ESA data that I want to use that's sitting somewhere, and then I have commercial data that I've purchased and I've got sitting, and I've got spreadsheets from people who've flown drones around my area of interest or whatever. Um, and so the architectures get kind of complex, and you've got to be able to, there's still deterministic processing, there's still data processing, there's still all of that, the raw underpinnings that have to happen. But to be able to lean on a model to decompose a problem and be able to look at the tooling it has available to it and the data it has available to it and surface things and be able to do this in parallel and at a scale that you just can't do it as a human, is incredible. Like if you've ever used Google Gemini and had to do deep research and you see it just fan out across 45 different sources and pull them in, we can do that with geospatial data too. And not just geospatial, but whatever the different data is that you want to use. But having a model, being able to leverage that, pull that together, and then explain what it did, then a human can sit there and say, "Yep, this all makes sense to me," or "You know what? Ignore that. Can you run that again, but ignore this." And that kind of interaction, speed at which you can interact with this data and use data, yes, is pretty wild.
Yeah, it's thanks for that story. That's illuminating, and really quite exciting. Um, and those were good examples, I think. They make a lot of sense. Frankly, I'm surprised by how well the natural language geocoding then works.
Yeah.
That's quite fascinating. Yeah,
That's
thanks for
that's
that.
pretty
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, that's pretty neat to do. And there's times that in the and our credible Earth, there are times where I'll sit there and I'll kind of play with it. And I'm like, if you did this, and I don't want this town or whatever, and kind of just see where we can get it and where it gets it right and wrong, and then we
Mm,
have to go in and fix it. But it's neat to see what's possible. Yeah, it's really
definitely.
cool.
So, looping back around to buy versus build in the context of the AI boom,
Yep.
what do you buy and what do you build? Like, is it like, tying together existing components? Like, do the models already exist? Do you train them? How does that work?
Yeah. So okay. So I would start with the data lake side, like if we're kind of layering it up, right? Like, so in general, I would say that what we find is, okay, a better way to explain it. So I'll talk about a lot of times inside of the company. I mean this in a super positive way. We are AWS partners, and I absolutely love the relationship we have there. I just feel AWS breathing down my neck all the time, and so every reInvent I go and I expect to watch somebody come on stage and be like, "Ta-da! Here's this thing that we used to, yeah, that we built internally or whatever the case may be," and they're like, "And now it's available for pennies on the dollar." Like, okay, cool. So what that does though is that forces us to keep pushing to the right. I think about it to the right, the customers. So the customer always, our experience, the customer always wants to do more than they are comfortable with from either a cost or a time or a complexity
Yeah,
kind of
that's
prop.
that's a fair statement. Yeah.
Right. They always wanted, like, which is great, right? That's what you want. You want somebody who's excited about, I'm like, this is, oh, we could do all these great things. Okay, cool. So how much can we enable them? And so as a services company, it's really critical for us to keep an eye on the industry and say, you know what, if we could leverage this COTS, whether it's a SaaS offering or some kind of COTS offering or an open source piece or whatever, then that lets us move further to the right. Lets us help the customer get further with the same dollars or whatever the case may be. So from a data lake perspective, if we kind of look at it from that layer, in a build versus buy, we always say, please don't build your own. Don't start from scratch here. Worst case, just grab a bunch of open source tooling, and kind of wire it together yourself if you really have to. We have an open source stack we call Film Drop, which is a lot of that kind of pre-configured and stacked together or wired together to provide ingest, archive, processing, distribution, visualization on top of it, and all that. We can bring that to bear, and then obviously things like Ellipsis Drive, like there's there's commercial solutions to these things as well, in addition to kind of the open source side. So starting there, and then we start building on top of that. And once you start getting into the AI pieces and things along those lines, that's where it's going to be custom builds. we will try to avoid building a custom model if we don't have to. But it depends on the use case, right? If somebody wants a natural language interface to a bunch of deterministic stuff, we're not going to build a new LLM. We're going to figure out how to leverage one. We'll leverage Bedrock, or we can self-host it, or whatever the case may be. But or we go right to a vendor. But we'll leverage those there. If it's a science model, we can pull those. NASA's developed some in concert with IBM. We can leverage those. Those are still, I would still put those in the researchy kind of space. But then if there's like we want a really fine-tuned model for this use case, then yeah, we put some time in there. But those all become build solutions when there isn't an easy buy solution. There isn't an obvious buy solution, or there's still more exploration for the customer to be done. Here's the customer's hypothesis. Let's try it out and see how it works. And then we can iterate and evolve with them. And then eventually it'll get commoditized. And then we just shift the whole solution to the right, whole stack to the right. And we figure out the next piece that they can't do yet that they want to do. And that's where we live.
I can definitely imagine it's an ever-evolving environment where, what you needed to build this year, you can buy next year or maybe even next quarter. Yeah.
It's a personality test. You either see that as incredibly frustrating or really exciting. And it just depends on who you are.
I choose the latter.
I agree with you, right? You're always doing new fun stuff. You're always being challenged. The customer's always like, can't you do? It's like, I don't know, maybe. And then you got to sit down and figure out, how can we make that work? It's a really fun place to operate.
I can imagine, for sure. And I think with that, our time is up. So Dan, thank you so much for sharing your stories, I should say. And for those tuning in who'd like to know more, we'll leave some links in the description so you can find the resources you're looking for. So with that, thanks for being with us today, and until the next one.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.